They say a wedding is the start of a story, but as I hit record on my phone, I didn't realize I was actually filming the series finale of my own marriage. If you've ever had to choose your own survival over the love of your life, then this story is for you. Stay with me, because sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is stop fighting for someone who stopped choosing you a long time ago. The air at the vineyard was thick with a scent of crushed grapes and expensive perfume, a cloying sweetness that seemed to coat the back of my throat. It was one of those golden hour receptions where the sun hangs low and heavy, turning everything into a filtered photograph. Warm, honeyed, and inherently dishonest. My wife, Ellie, stood at the edge of the dance floor, her laughter cutting through the soft hum of the string quartet like a silver blade. She looked radiant in a silk slip dress the color of a bruised plum, the fabric catching the light with every choreographed movement of her body. I stood by the bar, a scotch in my hand that had long since gone lukewarm. I was watching her. Not with the suspicious eyes of a jealous husband, but with the quiet, analytical gaze of a man who had spent 8 years learning the geography of her soul. Lately, however, the map had changed. The landmarks were shifting, the I love yous were becoming transactional, and her smile, once a lighthouse in my darker moments, now felt like a polite mask she donned for the public. "Ladies, to the floor!" The DJ's voice boomed, shattering the romantic atmosphere. The crowd shifted with a rustle of silk and a clatter of heels. A flock of women gathered in the center of the hardwood floor, a sea of outstretched hands and giggling anticipation. I saw Ellie hesitate. She usually loathed these traditions, calling them relics of a desperate age, but then I saw him. Joe Reynolds was leaning against a weathered wine barrel just a few feet away from her. Joe was a work friend, a man whose name appeared on her phone screen with a frequency I had until tonight filed under the mundane category of professional necessity. He was charismatic in a way that felt loud, a man who took up more oxygen than he deserved. He caught her eye across the crowded floor and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Suddenly, Ellie was in the thick of it. I pulled out my phone, driven by a sudden, inexplicable urge to capture the moment. The joy of her cousin's wedding, the rare sight of Ellie being playful. I hit the red record button. The screen framed her perfectly, a beautiful woman caught in the amber of a perfect evening. The bride turned her back, counted down, and launched the bouquet. It was a chaotic arc of white roses and trailing ivy. The crowd surged, and there, leaping just a fraction higher than the rest, was Ellie. She caught it against her chest, her face lighting up with a triumph that felt different. She didn't turn to me. She didn't look across the room to find her husband and wink. Instead, she turned toward Joe. It happened in slow motion on my screen. Joe stepped forward, his hands sliding onto the small of her back with a familiarity that made the scotch in my stomach feel like battery acid. Ellie leaned in, not a polite peck on the cheek, not a congrats hug. She leaned into him, her hand gripping the bouquet, and kissed him. It was brief, maybe 2 seconds, but it was weighted with the gravity of a secret history. Her eyes closed, his hand tightened on her waist. If you've ever felt that sudden, cold realization that the person you're looking at isn't who you thought they were, hit that like button and subscribe. We've all been there, the moment the floor drops out from under you. The crowd cheered, a roar of approval echoing through the vineyard. To them, it was a joke, a bit of wedding reception theater, a playful nod to the luck of the catch. But as I watched the playback through the lens, I saw the truth. A joke doesn't make a woman's shoulders relax like she's finally come home. A joke doesn't have that kind of lingering magnetic pull. My heart didn't race, it stopped. It felt like a heavy stone sitting in the center of my chest, dragging my ribs down until breathing felt like a chore. I lowered the phone, the screen still glowing with the image of my wife's betrayal. Who is he? The question wasn't about Joe. I knew Joe. The question was, who is she? Because the woman on that dance floor, looking at another man with a hunger she hadn't shown me in 3 years, was a stranger living in my house. I gripped the phone so hard the edges dug into my palm. I could feel the heat of the device, a tiny vibrating engine of truth. 8 years of anniversaries, of shared mortgages, of I love you whispered into the dark. All of it was being reevaluated in real time, categorized as either real or part of the performance. "Mark, did you see that? Ellie's got the luck," her cousin shouted, stumbling over to me with a gin and tonic in hand. I forced my facial muscles to move. I practiced a smile that I knew was a hollow imitation of joy. "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a long way off. "Quite the catch." I looked back at the dance floor. Ellie was laughing now, tucked back into a group of her friends, the bouquet held loosely at her side as if it were a casual accessory. Joe had disappeared back into the shadows of the bar, blending into the crowd like he had never left it. It was as if it hadn't happened. If I didn't have the video, I might have convinced myself it was a hallucination, a trick of the sunset and the scotch. I might have listened to that desperate, weak part of my brain that wanted to believe in playful behavior. But the camera doesn't lie. The camera records the things we are too afraid to admit to ourselves. I walked toward the exit, the cool night air of the vineyard calling to me like a sanctuary. I needed space. I needed to breathe without the smell of her vanilla perfume clogging my lungs. Behind me, the party roared on, a celebration of a beginning, while I walked silently into the cold, dark reality of my own ending. As I reached the edge of the vineyard, I looked back one last time. Ellie was dancing, her silhouette bright against the strings of fairy lights. She looked happy, and for the first time in 8 years, I realized that her happiness had nothing to do with me. The drive back to Austin was a study in forced normalcy. Ellie sat in the passenger seat, the bouquet of white roses resting in her lap like a trophy from a war she had already won. She hummed along to the radio, her fingers tapping a light, syncopated rhythm on the dashboard. Watching her out of the corner of my eye, I found it impossible to reconcile this woman with the one I had met a decade ago. We were different people then. We had met at a tech conference in downtown Dallas, a sea of navy blazers and lanyard-clad strangers. I was the analytical developer, more comfortable with lines of code than lines of small talk. She was the marketing manager who could sell ice to a glacier. Our chemistry had been effortless, a binary click of compatibility. I remember the way she looked at me across a crowded hotel bar, a look that made me feel like the only person in the room who mattered. In those early years, our life in Austin had been a kaleidoscope of shared ambition. We bought a fixer-upper in East Austin, spending our weekends covered in drywall dust and white paint, dreaming of the life we would build within those walls. We had our spots, the taco truck on 6th Street where we had our first real fight, the quiet trail by Lady Bird Lake where I had proposed under a canopy of live oaks. Back then, the silence between us was comfortable, a warm blanket of mutual understanding. But somewhere between the promotions and the mortgage payments, the blanket had started to fray. As I navigated the dark highway, I began to trace the timeline of the drift. It hadn't been a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing erosion. It was the long work hours that turned into late-night emails at the dinner table. It was the way our conversation shifted from dreams of travel to the logistics of the grocery list. I had tried to be the supportive husband, the calm anchor in her stormy career. When she complained about the pressure at the firm, I listened. When she stayed late to finish a campaign, I had dinner waiting. I thought I was being attentive. I realize now I was just being a witness to her departure. "You're quiet tonight, Mark," Ellie said, her voice cutting through the hum of the tires. She didn't look at me. She was busy adjusting a stray petal on a rose. "Just thinking about the wedding," I lied. The words felt heavy, like I was swallowing lead. "It was a lot of energy. It was fun," she mused, a small, private smile playing on her lips. The kind of smile that isn't meant for the person you're talking to. Joe's a riot, isn't he? He really knows how to liven up a dull reception. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Joe, the name was a puncture wound. I thought back to the small anecdotes she'd shared over the last few months. The funny things Joe said in meetings, the helpful way he'd stepped in when her lead developer quit. I had seen him as a colleague, a charismatic extrovert who was simply part of her professional world. I hadn't realized he was the wedge she was using to pry herself away from me. I remembered a night 3 weeks ago. Ellie had come home late, her cheeks flushed from a team happy hour. She had been unusually affectionate, rambling about a new project, but her phone had stayed face down on the nightstand for the rest of the evening. At the time, I thought she was finally disconnecting from work to be with me. Now I saw the tactical retreat for what it was. She wasn't disconnecting from work, she was protecting a secret. The suburbs of Austin began to blur past the windows, the cookie-cutter houses with their glowing porch lights, each one a curated box of potential secrets. I thought about the shared dreams we had discussed on that trail by the lake. We were going to hike the Inca Trail. We were going to start a boutique agency together. We were going to be the couple that grew old and eccentric, holding hands on a porch swing. Now those dreams felt like artifacts from a civilization that had been wiped out by a silent plague. I looked at Ellie's profile, in the dim light of the instrument cluster. She looked the same nose, the same curve of her jaw, but the soul behind the eyes had moved house. I wondered when the last time was that she had truly looked at me. Not just looked at me to see if I'd finished the dishes or paid the electric bill, but seen me. I realized with a jarring clarity that I had become a piece of furniture in her life, reliable, functional, and entirely overlooked. I was the background noise to her new exciting soundtrack. "Mark?" she asked again, this time turning to look at me. "Are you okay? You're gripping the wheel so hard your knuckles are white." I forced myself to loosen my hands. I took a breath, the air smelling of the roses in her lap. "I'm fine, Ellie, just tired. It's been a long day." "Well, we're almost home," she said, leaning back and closing her eyes. "I can't wait to get out of these heels." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. We were almost home, but the house on the quiet street in Austin didn't feel like home anymore. It was just a building where two people lived in parallel, their lives touching only at the edges. As I pulled into the driveway, the motion sensor light clicked on, flooding the car with a harsh, unflinching white light. It felt like a spotlight on a stage. The performance of the happy couple was reaching its final act, and I was the only one who had seen the script for the ending. I turned off the engine, the silence of the night rushing in to fill the space where our conversation used to be. The house was dark when we walked inside, a sprawling modern space that had once felt like an achievement, but now felt like an exhibition of things I no longer owned. Ellie tossed her keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, a sharp metallic clatter that echoed through the foyer, and headed straight for the bedroom, kicking off her heels as she went. She was still humming, a light, airy sound that made my skin crawl. It was the sound of someone who had gotten away with something. I didn't follow her. I sat on the edge of the leather sofa in the living room, the darkness pressing in around me. The only light came from the glowing screen of my phone. I hit play. There she was, frozen in the grainy resolution of a 4K video. I scrolled the progress bar back and forth, watching the moment of the catch in slow motion. Frame by frame, the roses hit her chest. Frame by frame, her head turned. Frame by frame, she found him. I zoomed in on Joe's face. He wasn't surprised. There was no "oh, look who caught the bouquet" expression. He was waiting. His body language was predatory. He was leaned in before she even made her move, his hand already reaching for her waist as if he had a legal claim to it. And the kiss. God, the kiss. It wasn't the clumsy, drunken peck of a wedding guest. It was rhythmic. It was practiced. It was a bridge between two people who had crossed it many times before. I felt a cold, analytical detachment start to settle over me. As a developer, I was trained to find bugs in the system, to look at a beautiful interface and find the broken line of code that made the whole thing a lie. My marriage was the interface. This video was the source code. I began to look back through my mental archives, rereading every interaction of the last 6 months through this new lens. I remembered the nights she came home smelling of wood smoke and expensive gin, claiming she'd been at a networking event at a rooftop bar. I remembered the way she'd suddenly started taking her phone into the bathroom, the soft clack of the door locking behind her. I remembered how, 2 months ago, she'd stopped asking me about my day. I had told myself she was stressed, that she was overwhelmed by the new accounts at the firm. I had convinced myself that my role as a husband was to be the silent pillar that didn't demand her energy. I wasn't a pillar. I was a doormat. The bedroom door opened, and a sliver of light spilled across the hardwood floor. Ellie emerged in an oversized t-shirt, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. She looked soft, domestic, and utterly innocent. It was a staggering piece of theater. "You're still sitting in the dark?" she asked, her voice hovering somewhere between concern and annoyance. "Mark, you're acting weird. Did something happen at the reception? Did someone say something to you?" "No one said a word, Ellie," I said. I didn't look up from the screen. I watched the video one more time, the way her fingers curled into the fabric of Joe's blazer, the way Joe whispered something into her ear right afterward that made her throw her head back and laugh. "Then what is it?" She walked over to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. The sound of the tap was deafening in the silence. "You've been brooding since we left the vineyard. If you're mad that I stayed late at work on Tuesday, just say it. Don't do the silent treatment thing." I finally looked up. The light from the kitchen caught the side of her face, highlighting the jawline I had kissed every morning for years. "I'm not mad about Tuesday, Ellie. I'm just watching a movie." "A movie? At 1 in the morning?" She leaned against the counter, sipping her water, watching me with a guarded expression. The marketing manager was back. She was reading my body language, looking for the opening, preparing her counter pitch. "It's a short film," I said. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy, and walked toward her. I felt a strange sense of power in the silence. For months, she had held all the cards because she had all the information. Now the deck was starting to tilt in my favor. It's about a wedding, and a catch, and a kiss. She didn't move, but I saw the glass tremble in her hand. Just a fraction of an inch, a tiny glitch in the performance. "Mark, I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," I said, stopping a few feet away from her. The smell of the roses from the foyer drifted into the kitchen, a funeral scent. "I think you've known what I'm talking about for a long time. I think Joe knows too." The mention of his name hit her like a physical blow. She set the glass down on the counter with a sharp thud. The mask didn't slip, it shattered. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, toward her phone, toward any exit that wasn't blocked by the man she had promised to love. "Mark," she started, her voice dropping an octave. "It isn't what it looks like. It never is it?" I held the phone up, the screen facing her. I hit play. "Tell me, Ellie, in marketing, how do you spin this? Is this brand engagement? Is this a strategic partnership? Or is this just my wife kissing another man in front of 100 people because she thinks her husband is too blind to see what's right in front of him?" The video played out between us, a glowing digital ghost. Ellie watched herself catch the flowers. She watched herself turn to Joe. She watched the kiss. And as the video ended, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked at me with a coldness that was more honest than anything she had said to me in a year. "I didn't think you were recording," she whispered. "I know," I said. "That was your first mistake. Your second was thinking that calm meant stupid." The tension in the kitchen was a living thing, a cord stretched so tight it was humming. We stood there, two strangers in a house full of memories that were rapidly turning into ash. "I didn't think you were recording." The words hung in the air, more damning than a confession. It wasn't "I'm sorry" or "it didn't mean anything." It was a tactical error. She had been caught in a blind spot she didn't know existed, and her first instinct was to lament the lack of surveillance. I walked to the dining room table and sat down, the wood cold against my forearms. I placed the phone in the center of the table, the screen still glowing, a digital campfire we were both huddling around. "How long, Ellie?" I asked. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The silence of the house did the heavy lifting for me. She stayed in the kitchen for a moment, her silhouette framed by the harsh light of the range hood. Then, she moved. She walked to the table and sat across from me, but she didn't look at the phone. She looked at the wall behind my head, her eyes tracing the pattern of the wallpaper we'd chosen together 3 summers ago. "It started at the conference in Denver," she said, her voice flat. "Last October." "October," I repeated. I ran the numbers. 5 months. 5 months of her coming home and asking how my day was. 5 months of us choosing what to watch on Netflix. 5 months of her lying in the bed next to me, her skin touching mine while her mind was miles away with a man who laughed at my expense. Emotional distance, I felt. That wasn't work stress, was it? Work was part of it, she snapped. A flash of the old Ellie, the one who defended her turf, returning. You were always so fine, Mark. You're always calm. You're always stable. You're like a rock, and that's great. But you don't realize how cold a rock is when you're trying to keep warm. So you found a fire in Joe? I asked. The cliché felt beneath her, but betrayal often is. He sees me, she whispered, and finally she looked at me. Her eyes were glassy, but there were no tears falling. He sees the pressure I'm under. He knows what it's like to live in that world. We started talking. Just talking, Mark. It was just lunches, then drinks after a bad meeting. It was someone to vent to who didn't just give me a logical solution to every problem. It was an affair, Ellie. Don't dress it up in communication and support. You were sharing your life with him. The parts that belonged to me, it wasn't physical, she insisted, leaning forward, her hands gripped together on the table. Tonight, that kiss, it was the wine and the music, and he was just there. It was a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment because of the atmosphere. I looked at the video again. A momentary lapse doesn't involve that kind of muscle memory, Ellie. I'm a developer. I know the difference between a random glitch and a programmed routine. You've kissed him before. Maybe not at a wedding, maybe not in public, but that wasn't the first time your lips met his. She didn't deny it. She looked away, her silence confirming the architecture of the lie. Was it ever physical? I asked. The question felt like a serrated blade in my throat. No, she said, but there was a hesitation, a beat too long, a flick of the eyes to the left. It was emotional. We texted. We talked late at night when you were asleep. It was a connection I didn't think I could have anymore. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, Austin was still. The streetlights cast long orange shadows over the lawns of our neighbors. People who probably thought we were the gold standard couple of the block. I thought about the hundreds of hours I'd spent supporting her, the nights I'd rubbed her shoulders while she complained about, the very job that was providing her the opportunity to meet him. I had been her infrastructure, the quiet systems that kept her life running, so she had the luxury of seeking excitement elsewhere. You said I was cold, I said, turning back to her, but I was the one keeping the house standing while you were out trying to burn it down. You think Joe sees you? Joe sees a trophy. Joe sees a woman who is willing to betray the man who built a life with her. He doesn't see your stress, Ellie. He sees your weakness. You don't know him, she yelled, her voice finally breaking. The tears started then, thick, angry drops that smeared her mascara. He makes me feel alive. When was the last time you made me feel alive, Mark? When was the last time we did something that wasn't planned 3 weeks in advance on a shared calendar? I thought that was the life we wanted, I said. I thought stability was the goal. I didn't realize I was supposed to be your entertainer as well as your husband. I just wanted to be seen, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to go to her. I didn't want to pull her chair closer and tell her we'd fix it. I didn't want to be the calm one anymore. The calm had been a cage, and the door was wide open. I walked to the hallway and grabbed my laptop. I came back to the table, opened it, and logged into our cellular account. I didn't need a private investigator. In the digital age, we all carry our own indictments in our pockets. What are you doing? She asked, wiping her eyes. I'm looking at the logs, Ellie. I'm looking at the emotional connection. The screen populated with data. Row after row of timestamps. 11:30 p.m. 1:15 a.m. 6:45 a.m. The texts between her and Joe were a constant stream, a secondary heartbeat beneath the skin of our marriage. I saw the data usage for the retreat in January. The working weekend in February. You stayed in the same hotel, I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. In February. You said the firm booked a block of rooms. We did. It was a conference. But you were on the phone with him at 2 a.m. while you were in the same building. I looked at the data spikes. Or were you in the same room, using the Wi-Fi to send things you didn't want on the bill? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The truth was written in the metadata, a cold binary record of her departure. I loved you, Ellie, I said, and the past tense felt like a death certificate. I love the woman I thought you were. But the woman in this video, the woman on this spreadsheet, I don't know her. And I don't think I want to. The silence that followed my words was heavier than the shouting. It was the silence of a structure finally giving way, the beams snapping under the weight of 1,000 small betrayals. Ellie looked at the laptop, then at me, her face a mask of ruined mascara and raw, exposed panic. She reached out as if to touch the keyboard, to delete the evidence of her shadow life. But she stopped halfway. "Mark, please," she whispered. It was a fantasy, that's all it was. A way to escape the pressure. It didn't mean I didn't love you. "Love isn't a feeling you have in a vacuum, Ellie," I said, closing the laptop with a definitive click. "Love is a series of choices. Every time you texted him at 2 a.m, you chose him. Every time you leaned into him for comfort instead of coming to me, you chose him. And tonight, on that dance floor, you didn't just choose him, you advertised it." I stood up and walked to the kitchen, my movements feeling robotic. I began to clear the counter, moving the wine bottle and the glasses into the sink. The mundane actions felt like a tether to reality. I needed to do something with my hands so they wouldn't shake. "I can't do this," she said, her voice rising. "You're being so cold. You're just cutting me off. After 8 years, don't I get a chance to fix it? Don't we try therapy? Don't we try to find that us again?" I turned to face her, leaning against the sink. The us you're looking for was built on the assumption that we were both playing the same game. I was playing for keeps. You were playing for excitement. You can't fix a foundation that's been hollowed out by 5 months of lies. Every memory I have of the last year is tainted now. I have to look at every smile you gave me and wonder if you were thinking of a text he sent. I have to look at every night we spent together and wonder if you were just waiting for me to fall asleep so you could call him. "It wasn't like that," she cried, standing up so quickly her chair skidded across the floor. "I struggled with it. I felt guilty every single day." "Guilt is just the price you pay for doing what you want anyway," I replied. "It's not a virtue, Ellie. It's just a tax. And I'm not interested in being the person who collects it." I walked back to the table and picked up my phone. I saw a notification on the screen, a text from Joe. My heart gave a sickening thud, but I didn't open it. I didn't need to see his words. I had seen his hands on my wife's waist. That was all the communication I required. "I'm going to stay at a hotel tonight," I said. "No," Ellie said, her voice small. "This is your house too. I'll go to my sister's." "It doesn't matter where you go, Ellie. The distance between us is already infinite." I watched her move through the house, a frantic, disjointed version of the woman I knew. She grabbed a bag, throwing clothes in with a desperation that was painful to witness. She was crying properly now, the kind of deep, racking sobs that usually would have broken my heart. But tonight, they just sounded like noise. She stopped at the door, her hand on the handle, the bouquet of roses still sitting on the entryway table. They looked wilted already, their edges browning in the harsh light of the foyer. "Are we really done?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just like that? One video, one night, and 8 years are just gone?" "They weren't gone tonight, Ellie," I said, standing in the middle of the living room. "They've been disappearing for a long time. Tonight was just the moment the lights came on and showed me the room was empty." She opened the door. The humid Austin night air rushed in, smelling of rain and asphalt. She looked back at me one last time, a look of profound loss, of a woman who had realized too late that the grass wasn't greener, it was just a different kind of weeds. "I'm sorry, Mark," she whispered. "I know," I said. The door closed. The sound of her car starting in the driveway was the final punctuation mark on our marriage. I stood in the silence of the house, the light from the kitchen still humming. I felt an overwhelming sense of exhaustion, but beneath it, there was something else, a tiny, flickering flame of relief. The lie was over. The performance was done. I walked to the entryway and picked up the bouquet. I walked to the kitchen and dropped it into the trash can, the white roses disappearing beneath the coffee grounds and the discarded mail. Then, I sat back down at the table. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just opened my laptop and began to search for a new place to live. Not because I didn't love the house, but because the ghost of Joe Reynolds was in the walls and I didn't want to live in a haunted house. 6 months later, Austin felt like a different city. The heat was the same, a thick, oppressive blanket that shimmered off the pavement of Congress Avenue, but the map had changed. I no longer avoided the taco truck on 6th Street or the trail by the lake because they were ours. I avoided them because I was a different man, and those places belonged to a version of me that had died in the back of a vineyard. The divorce had been a surgical process. There were no shouting matches in court, no dramatic revelations over divided assets. When the evidence is a 4K video of a betrayal, there isn't much for a lawyer to argue. Ellie had moved into a small apartment near her office. I heard through the grapevine that Joe had stepped back from their situation once the reality of a messy divorce and a potential lawsuit for marital interference landed on his desk. Charisma, it turns out, is a poor shield against a legal subpoena. I had thrown myself into work, but not with the desperate, soul-crushing hours of the past. I worked with a quiet, focused intent. I started taking a pottery class in East Austin, a suggestion from a friend that I'd initially laughed at. But there was something about the clay, the way it resisted, the way it required you to be present and centered, that mirrored my own rebuilding. If you weren't focused, the whole thing collapsed on the wheel. You had to feel the center. It was on a rainy Tuesday in November that I met Lana. I was at a small, cluttered bookstore coffee shop in Hyde Park, trying to balance a stack of tech manuals and a leaking Americano. I tripped slightly over a stray chair, and the manuals began their inevitable descent toward the floor. "I've got them," a voice said, calm and grounded. A woman was already kneeling, gathering the books with practiced ease. She looked up and smiled, not a marketing smile, not a performance for a crowd, but a genuine, crinkly-eyed expression of kindness. She looked to be in her early 30s, wearing a denim jacket and a smudge of yellow paint on her thumb. "Thanks," I said, feeling a flush of heat that wasn't from the coffee. "I'm a bit of a disaster today." "It's the humidity," she said, handing me the books. "It makes everything slippery." "I'm Lana, Mark." We ended up sharing a small, wobbly table. Lana was a third-grade teacher, a woman who spent her days navigating the chaotic, honest emotions of children. She was the opposite of the world I had come from. She didn't speak in buzzwords or strategic pivots. She spoke about the way her students saw the world, about the mural she was painting in the school hallway, and about the best places in the city to find real, unpretentious brisket. For the first time in years, I found myself talking. Not explaining, not defending, not providing, just talking. "You have a very analytical way of describing your coffee," she joked, leaning back and watching me. "Is everything a system to you, Mark?" I paused, the old sting of Ellie's cold rock comment flaring up for a second before fading. "It used to be," I admitted. "I thought if I built the system perfectly, it couldn't fail. I'm learning that some things aren't meant to be systems. They're meant to be, well, messy." Lana nodded, her eyes steady on mine. "Messy is where the good stuff happens. You can't grow anything in a lab." Over the next few weeks, the drift I had experienced with Ellie was replaced by a slow, deliberate pull. With Lana, there was no shared calendar to manage our intimacy. There were spontaneous walks through Zilker Park, late-night debates about old movies, and a silence that didn't feel like a vacuum. It felt like peace, but the ghost of the wedding still lingered in the back of my mind. Trust is a muscle that, once torn, heals with thick, inflexible scar tissue. Every time Lana's phone buzzed on the table, I felt a microscopic clench in my gut. Every time she mentioned a male colleague, the analytical part of my brain started to run the numbers, looking for the glitch. One evening, as we sat on her porch watching a thunderstorm roll in over the hill country, she reached out and took my hand. "You're doing it again," she whispered. "Doing what?" "Running the code." Trying to see if the math adds up. She squeezed my hand, her palm warm and real. "I'm not her, Mark. And you're not the man who was in that video. You don't have to watch me through a lens to see if I'm real." I looked at her, the lightning illuminating the honest, grounded beauty of her face. I realized then that Ellie's betrayal hadn't just been about Joe, it had been a theft of my ability to be present. She had turned me into a spectator of my own life. "I know," I said, and for the first time I felt the last of the ice in my chest crack. "I'm trying to learn how to keep the camera off." Rebuilding wasn't about finding a new version of the old life. It was about realizing the old life had been a house built on sand, and the storm had been the only thing that could show me the truth. I wasn't fine yet, but as the rain began to fall, hitting the tin roof with a steady, rhythmic pulse, I knew I was standing on solid ground. The following spring, I found myself back at a wedding. It was a smaller affair this time, a backyard ceremony in Wimberley, draped in wild wisteria and lit by the soft, honest glow of string lights. The air didn't smell of cloying perfume or expensive secrets. It smelled of cedar and the cooling earth. Lana stood beside me, her hand resting comfortably in the crook of my arm. She looked radiant in a simple yellow dress that matched the warmth of her personality. I looked down at her, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel the need to scan the room for threats. I wasn't an analyst looking for a system failure. I was just a man at a party with a woman he loved. As the evening wound down, the music shifted. The familiar, upbeat tempo of the Bouquet toss began to play. A group of women gathered near the trellis, their laughter echoing off the limestone hills. I saw Lana look at me, a playful question in her eyes. "Go on," I said, smiling. "Show them how it's done." I stayed back by the cedar fence, watching the scene unfold. I didn't pull out my phone. I didn't hit record. The device stayed in my pocket, dark and silent. I had realized that if you feel the need to document your life to prove it's happening, you've already lost the lead role in it. The bride turned, laughed, and threw the flowers high into the moonlight. It was a beautiful, soaring arc, and there, caught in a moment of pure, unforced joy, was Lana. She didn't leap over anyone. The roses just seemed to find her, settling into her hands as if they belonged there. She turned immediately. She didn't look for a ghost in the crowd or a shadow by the bar. Her eyes locked onto mine across the grass. She walked toward me, the white petals stark against her yellow dress. When she reached me, she didn't wait for a signal. She leaned in and kissed me. A kiss that tasted of wine, laughter, and the absolute certainty of the present moment. It was a mirror of the moment that had destroyed my marriage, but the reflection was finally clear. "You didn't record that," she whispered, pulling back just enough to look into my eyes. "I didn't need to," I said, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I know exactly where I am." The drive back to our new place, a small cottage we were renovating together, was filled with the kind of silence I had once feared but now craved. It was the silence of two people who didn't need to fill the air with noise to prove they were still there. I thought about Ellie. I'd seen her a few weeks prior, a brief encounter at a grocery store. She looked tired, her movements hurried and defensive. We had exchanged the polite, empty pleasantries of two people who had shared a life but no longer shared a language. I didn't feel anger, and I didn't feel the old, hollow ache of betrayal. I felt a profound sense of distance. She was a character from a book I had finished reading a long time ago. Trust, I realized as I watched the dark hills of Texas roll past, isn't about the absence of betrayal. It's about the presence of self-respect. It's the knowledge that even if the world falls apart again, you are the kind of person who can walk through the fire and come out the other side with your soul intact. Betrayal is a thief, but it only takes what you allow it to keep. It takes the lies you believed and the time you wasted, but it can't take your ability to choose yourself. It had taken me 8 years to realize that love isn't enough to make someone choose you. You have to be the one who chooses you first. We pulled into the driveway, the motion light clicking on. I looked at the house, the peeling paint we were going to fix on Saturday, the garden Lana was planting, the life that was messy, unplanned, and entirely real. "Home," Lana said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Home," I repeated. I left the phone in the car. I didn't need the light from the screen to find my way to the door. I walked into the house, and as the door clicked shut behind us, I realized the most important lesson of all: sometimes, the best catch you ever make is the one that forces you to let go of everything that was never yours to begin with.